The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Rosemount Palace as Queen Isabella adjusted her pearl necklace with practiced elegance. At 62, she had ruled the kingdom of Aldemir for nearly 3 decades, transforming from a beloved princess into a monarch, known for her sharp tongue and rigid adherence to protocol. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, not a strand out of place, and her navy blue suit spoke of authority and control. Today marked the annual Children's Garden Festival, a cherished tradition where the royal family opened the palace grounds to local schools and orphanages. It was meant to be a day of joy and wonder for the children, but Queen Isabella viewed it more as a carefully orchestrated public relations exercise that required absolute precision in execution. Princess Sophia, the 12-year-old daughter of Crown Prince Alexander and Princess Helena, skipped along the garden path with the innocent enthusiasm that only children possess. Her golden curls bounced with each step, and her emerald green dress, specially chosen for the occasion, sparkled in the sunlight. Unlike her grandmother, Sophia saw the world through eyes filled with genuine curiosity and kindness, traits that sometimes clashed with the rigid expectations of royal life. The young princess had been looking forward to this day for weeks, not because of the cameras or the formal ceremony, but because she genuinely loved meeting the children who would visit. She had convinced the kitchen staff to prepare extra portions of her favorite strawberry tarts to share with the guests, and she had practiced her welcoming speech until she could recite it perfectly without seeming rehearsed. Captain Marcus Reed stood at attention near the Rose Garden, his military bearing impeccable despite the internal conflict that had been growing within him for months. At 35, he was one of the youngest men ever to achieve the position of Royal Guard Captain, a role that had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had served King Isabella's father, and his own father had protected the current queen during her early years on the throne. Marcus had dedicated his life to the crown, believing deeply in the principles of duty, honor, and protection that his family had instilled in him since childhood. His dark eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, not just for external threats, but increasingly for the subtle cruelties that seemed to emanate from within the palace walls themselves. Today, something felt different in the air, a tension that made his instincts sharp and his jaw tight. The first sign of trouble came during the morning briefing when Queen Isabella had made several pointed comments about maintaining proper decorum and ensuring that certain family members didn't embarrass the crown with their childish behavior. Her eyes had lingered meaningfully on a photograph of Princess Sophia that adorned the briefing room wall, and Marcus had felt his stomach clench with a familiar sense of unease. As the morning progressed, guests began arriving at the palace gates. Children from 3 different schools, ranging in age from 6 to 14, filed through security with their teachers and chaperones. Their faces glowed with excitement as they caught their first glimpses of the magnificent palace grounds, with its perfectly manicured lawns, exotic flower beds, and stunning fountains that seemed to dance in the morning light. Princess Sophia had positioned herself near the main entrance to the gardens, ready to greet each group personally. She had insisted on this arrangement, despite protocol officers suggesting that she simply make one grand entrance after all the guests had assembled. The young princess understood instinctively that personal connections mattered more than theatrical presentations, though she couldn't yet articulate this wisdom in adult terms. Queen Isabella watched from her study window on the 2nd floor, her expression growing darker with each passing minute. She observed her granddaughter's animated conversations with the visiting children, the way Sophia knelt down to their level to hear their excited chatter, and how she laughed genuinely at their innocent jokes. To most observers, this would have been a heartwarming scene of royal grace and accessibility, but to the queen, it represented everything she found problematic about the new generation's approach to monarchy. The queen had built her reign on the foundation of distance and mystique, believing that the royal family's power came from being elevated above the common people. Marcus noticed the queen's disapproving gaze from his position below and felt his protective instincts sharpen. He had witnessed too many private moments where Her Majesty's criticism had reduced the young princess to tears, always delivered with surgical precision when no witnesses were present. The official palace narrative painted Queen Isabella as a devoted grandmother, but Marcus had seen the reality behind closed doors. As the ceremony preparation continued, Marcus positioned himself strategically to maintain clear sightlines to both the Queen and Princess Sophia. His training had taught him to anticipate problems before they materialized, and every fiber of his being suggested that today would test his loyalties in ways he had never imagined. The other royal guards noticed Marcus's heightened alertness but attributed it to his legendary dedication to duty. None of them suspected that their captain was struggling with a growing conflict between his oath to protect the crown and his moral obligation to protect an innocent child who happened to wear that crown. Princess Sophia, meanwhile, continued her preparations with the joy and determination that defined her character. She had no idea that her grandmother was plotting to use this public event as an opportunity to deliver a lesson in royal behavior that would be witnessed by hundreds of guests and potentially millions of television viewers around the world. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge centuries of royal protocol and force a decorated military officer to choose between his career and his conscience. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, the beautiful garden setting that should have hosted a celebration of childhood wonder was about to become the battleground for a very different kind of royal drama. The Children's Garden Festival was about to begin, but none of the participants could have predicted how this day would reshape their lives forever. The formal ceremony began at precisely 11 o'clock, as all royal events did in the Kingdom of Aldermere. Princess Sophia took her position at the ornate podium that had been erected near the central fountain, her prepared speech clutched in hands that trembled slightly with nervous excitement rather than fear. She had practiced these words dozens of times, but the sight of nearly 300 children gathered before her still took her breath away. "Welcome to Rosemount Palace," she began, her clear young voice carrying across the garden without the need for amplification. "Today these gardens belong to all of us. I hope you'll explore every corner, ask every question that comes to mind, and remember that curiosity is the most royal quality of all." The children responded with genuine enthusiasm, their applause spontaneous and warm. Teachers smiled at their students' excitement, and even the usually stoic palace staff found themselves touched by the princess's natural grace. This was exactly the kind of moment that made the monarchy relevant and beloved by the people. Authentic connection between the royal family and their subjects. From her elevated position on the palace terrace, Queen Isabella watched the scene unfold with growing irritation. Her granddaughter's speech deviated significantly from the approved text that emphasized tradition, respect, and proper behavior. Instead, Sophia was encouraging these children to treat the palace gardens as their personal playground, undermining the very sense of reverence and formality that the Queen believed was essential to royal mystique. Captain Marcus Reed observed both the princess and the Queen simultaneously, his trained eye catching subtle changes in body language that others might miss. He saw the Queen's fingers drumming against the stone balustrade, a telltale sign of her mounting displeasure. He also noticed how Princess Sophia's confidence grew with each positive response from her audience, her natural charisma beginning to shine through her initial nervousness. After the speech, the children were divided into smaller groups for guided tours of different sections of the garden. Princess Sophia had specifically requested to lead one of these groups personally. Another deviation from standard protocol that called for her to make a brief appearance and then withdraw to allow the professional guides to take over. The group assigned to Princess Sophia consisted of 12 children from St. Mary's Primary School, ranging in age from 7 to 10. They included Emma, a shy 8-year-old who clutched a small notebook where she recorded interesting facts; James, a precocious 9-year-old who asked endless questions about everything he encountered; and little Sarah, a 7-year-old who walked with a slight limp due to a birth defect, but possessed an infectious smile that lit up every room she entered. As they moved through the rose garden, Princess Sophia encouraged the children to smell different varieties of flowers, explaining how each one had been chosen for specific qualities of fragrance, color, or symbolic meaning. She told them stories about the garden's history, including tales of previous royal children who had played hide-and-seek among these same flower beds decades ago. "My great-grandmother planted this entire section when she was about your age," Sophia explained, kneeling beside a bed of particularly magnificent yellow roses. She wanted to create a place where children would always feel welcome in the palace, no matter who they were or where they came from. Little Sarah tugged on the princess's dress and whispered something in her ear. Sophia's face broke into a radiant smile as she listened. Then she turned to address the entire group. "Sarah just told me something wonderful," the princess announced. "She said these flowers smell like her grandmother's perfume. That's exactly what gardens are for, to help us remember the people we love and create new memories with friends we're just meeting." The children gathered closer around their royal guide, completely captivated by her genuine warmth and the way she made each of them feel special and important. This was not the formal, distant interaction they had expected with royalty, but something far more precious, a real connection with someone who truly cared about their experience. Captain Marcus smiled despite himself as he watched this interaction unfold. This was what the monarchy could be at its best, a bridge between tradition and compassion, authority and accessibility. Princess Sophia embodied everything that was noble about royal service, understanding instinctively that true leadership meant lifting others up rather than holding them at a distance. However, his smile faded as he noticed Queen Isabella descending from the terrace, her expression thunderous and her stride purposeful. She moved through the gardens with the precision of a military commander advancing on enemy territory, and Marcus realized with growing dread that Princess Sophia had been marked as the target of her grandmother's displeasure. The Queen's approach went unnoticed by the children and their royal guide, who were now engaged in an impromptu botany lesson as Sophia explained how different plants adapted to various growing conditions. The princess had removed her formal gloves to demonstrate how to properly feel soil moisture, another breach of protocol that would not go unnoticed by her grandmother. The secret to gardening, Princess Sophia was explaining, is understanding that every plant is different and needs different kinds of care. Just like people, really. We all grow better when someone pays attention to what makes us special. James raised his hand eagerly. Princess, do you have a favorite flower? I love them all for different reasons, Sophia replied thoughtfully, but I think my favorites are the ones that bloom even when conditions aren't perfect. They remind me that beauty can grow anywhere if you're brave enough to try. This philosophical observation, delivered with the unconscious wisdom that children sometimes possess, struck Captain Marcus as remarkably mature for a 12-year-old. It also highlighted the fundamental difference between Princess Sophia's approach to life and her grandmother's rigid worldview. Queen Isabella had closed to within 50 meters of the group, and Marcus could see the storm gathering in her expression. He knew from experience that when the Queen reached this level of visible anger, someone was about to face a public humiliation that would be remembered for years to come. The only question was whether he would stand by and watch it happen or find the courage to intervene. The children, still blissfully unaware of the approaching confrontation, continued to pepper their royal guide with questions about everything from palace life to her favorite foods. Princess Sophia answered each query with patience and humor, creating exactly the kind of positive publicity that the monarchy desperately needed in an era when public support for royal institutions was increasingly fragile. But Queen Isabella saw only chaos where others saw charm, disrespect where others saw authenticity, and weakness where others saw strength. As she drew closer to the group, her mind was already formulating the sharp words that would cut her granddaughter down to size in front of these impressionable children and their watchful teachers. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everyone's true character and force Captain Marcus Reed to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. Queen Isabella's arrival at the Rose Garden was announced by the subtle shift in atmosphere that always accompanied her presence. The palace staff members, who had been observing the children's tour from a respectful distance, immediately straightened their postures and stepped back, creating an invisible circle of tension around the scene. Even the children seemed to sense that something had changed, though they couldn't identify what had caused their sudden unease. Princess Sophia. The Queen's voice cut through the pleasant chatter like a blade through silk, each syllable precisely enunciated and loaded with disapproval. I believe we need to discuss your interpretation of royal protocol. The 12-year-old princess froze mid-sentence, her explanation of flower pollination dying on her lips as she turned to face her grandmother. The joy that had animated her features just moments before drained away, replaced by the careful, guarded expression she had learned to adopt whenever the Queen addressed her in that particular tone. Grandmother, Sophia replied quietly, offering a small curtsy despite the informal setting. I was just showing our guests the royal gardens. Indeed you were, Queen Isabella replied, her cold gaze sweeping over the assembled children before returning to her granddaughter. And in doing so, you have managed to violate virtually every standard of appropriate royal behavior that I have spent years attempting to teach you. Captain Marcus felt his jaw clench as he recognized the familiar pattern beginning to unfold. He had witnessed this dynamic too many times before. The Queen's public humiliation of her granddaughter disguised as necessary instruction in royal duty. What made this instance particularly cruel was the presence of the children, who were now watching with wide eyes as their beloved princess guide was transformed into a chastised schoolgirl. Little Sarah, the 7-year-old with the limp who had been so enchanted by the princess's kindness, instinctively moved closer to Sophia's side. Her small hand reached out to touch the princess's arm in a gesture of comfort, but Queen Isabella's sharp gaze stopped her mid-motion. "Children," the queen announced, her voice carrying the authority of absolute monarchy, "you are witnessing an important lesson about the responsibilities that come with royal birth. Princess Sophia has forgotten that her primary duty is to represent the dignity and tradition of the crown, not to play in the dirt like a common gardener." Princess Sophia's cheeks flushed crimson, but whether from embarrassment or anger, Captain Marcus couldn't tell. What he could see was the way her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them behind her back, and how her breathing had become shallow and controlled, in the way children learn when they're fighting back tears. "I was trying to help them learn about the gardens," Sophia said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were trying to be popular," Queen Isabella corrected sharply. "Popularity is not the goal of royalty, child. Respect is. Fear, when necessary, is. But this desperate need to be liked by every commoner you encounter is a weakness that will destroy the very institution you were born to serve." The words hit their target with surgical precision, and Marcus saw Princess Sophia flinch as if she had been physically struck. He also noticed how the children were beginning to look confused and upset, their magical day at the palace turning into something uncomfortable and frightening. Emma, the shy 8-year-old with the notebook, began to cry quietly. She had been so excited to meet a real princess, and now she was watching that same princess being scolded like she herself might be scolded at home when she did something wrong. The cognitive dissonance was too much for her young mind to process. "Your Majesty," one of the accompanying teachers ventured hesitantly, "perhaps the children should continue their tour while you speak with the princess privately?" Queen Isabella turned her icy gaze on the teacher with an expression that could have frozen fire. "These children are receiving an education more valuable than anything they could learn in your classroom, madam. They are learning that actions have consequences, even for princesses, especially for princesses." Captain Marcus felt something snap inside his chest as he watched this cruel theater unfold. His oath was to protect the royal family, but what was he supposed to do when one member of that family was systematically destroying another? His training had prepared him for external threats, assassins, and terrorists, but nothing had prepared him for this internal rot that was poisoning the very institution he had sworn to defend. Furthermore, Queen Isabella continued, her voice growing sharper with each word, "Princess Sophia has clearly forgotten that royal gardens are not playgrounds for common children to dig in with their dirty hands. These roses have been cultivated for generations, and they deserve more respect than to be pawed at by undisciplined students who wouldn't know a heritage bloom from a weed." This attack on the children themselves was the final straw for several people present. Captain Marcus saw the hurt and confusion in those young faces, watched as their wonder turned to shame, and felt his protective instincts surge to life in a way they never had before. James, the precocious 9-year-old who had asked so many questions, spoke up with the fearless honesty that only children possess. "But Your Majesty, Princess Sophia said the gardens were meant for children. She said your great-grandmother wanted all children to feel welcome here." The silence that followed this innocent challenge was deafening. Queen Isabella's face turned a shade of white that suggested volcanic fury barely contained beneath a veneer of royal composure. When she spoke again, her voice was so cold it seemed to lower the temperature of the garden itself. "What Princess Sophia told you," she said slowly, "was a romantic fairy tale with no basis in historical fact. Royal gardens are preserved for the appreciation of those educated enough to understand their significance, not as playgrounds for anyone who happens to wander in from the streets." Princess Sophia looked up at her grandmother with an expression that combined hurt, defiance, and dawning understanding of just how deep the cruelty ran. "But grandmother, great-grandmother Isabella did plant those roses for—" "Silence!" Queen Isabella snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. "You will not contradict your queen in front of outsiders. And you will not continue to embarrass this family with your pathetic attempts to buy affection from people who will never truly respect you anyway. The words hung in the air like poison gas, affecting everyone within hearing range. The children were now openly confused and upset. Their teachers were struggling to maintain professional composure while witnessing what amounted to public child abuse, and the palace staff were frozen in bureaucratic paralysis, unsure how to respond to a situation that had no precedent in their training manuals. But Captain Marcus Reed was no longer frozen. As he watched Princess Sophia's face crumble under the weight of her grandmother's verbal assault, as he saw 12 innocent children having their faith in kindness and fairness shattered by royal cruelty, something fundamental shifted inside him. His oath was to protect the crown, but Princess Sophia was the crown's future. More importantly, she was a 12-year-old child who deserved protection from bullies, even when those bullies wore crowns themselves. The moment of decision had arrived, and Marcus knew that whatever he chose to do next would change everything forever. The moment Captain Marcus Reed stepped forward and placed himself between Queen Isabella and Princess Sophia, centuries of royal protocol shattered like glass. His movement was smooth and deliberate, the trained response of a soldier who had finally identified the true enemy that needed to be confronted. The positioning was unmistakable to everyone present. The royal guard captain was protecting the princess from the queen herself. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of steel that surprised even him, "I believe the children have heard enough instruction for today. Perhaps it would be best if they continued their tour while you and Princess Sophia discuss matters privately." Queen Isabella's eyes widened in absolute shock. In 30 years of rule, no one had ever dared to interrupt her when she was delivering what she considered necessary discipline. The fact that this challenge came from her own royal guard captain, a man whose family had served hers with unwavering loyalty for 3 generations, was almost beyond her ability to comprehend. "Captain Reed," she said slowly, each word measured and dangerous, "you appear to have forgotten your place." "With respect, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, his military bearing unwavering despite the seismic nature of what he was doing, "my place is to protect members of the royal family from any threat to their well-being. That includes protecting them from each other when necessary." A collective gasp rose from the assembled staff, teachers, and children. No one had ever spoken to Queen Isabella in such terms, and the implications of what they were witnessing began to sink in. This wasn't just a breach of protocol. It was a revolution in miniature, playing out in a rose garden in front of 300 witnesses. Princess Sophia looked up at Captain Reed with a mixture of gratitude and terror, understanding instinctively that he was risking everything to shield her from her grandmother's cruelty. At 12, she was old enough to grasp that adults didn't usually stand up to other adults on her behalf, and certainly not when those adults wore crowns and commanded kingdoms. "Marcus," she whispered, using his first name for the first time in her life, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he replied softly, not taking his eyes off the queen. "It's my job to protect you, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." Queen Isabella's face had progressed through several shades of rage and was now settling into the pale, controlled fury that palace staff had learned to fear above all other expressions. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority backed by centuries of royal tradition. "Captain Reed, you are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Your commission is revoked, your pension forfeited, and your family's association with this palace is ended. You have precisely 10 minutes to vacate the grounds before you are arrested for insubordination and treason." The pronouncement hit like a physical blow, not just to Marcus but to everyone who heard it. 3 generations of faithful service erased with a handful of words, a lifetime of dedication dismissed because he had chosen to protect a child from verbal abuse. The other guards present looked stricken, torn between their loyalty to their captain and their fear of the Queen's retribution. But Marcus didn't waver. If anything, the Queen's reaction only confirmed that he had made the right choice. "I understand, Your Majesty. But before I leave, I have something to say to these children." "You will say nothing," Queen Isabella began, but Marcus had already turned to address the young faces that were watching this unprecedented drama unfold. "Listen to me, all of you," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the garden. "What you heard today about this place not being meant for children like you, that was wrong. These gardens were created by people who believed in beauty and wonder, and those things are meant to be shared with everyone who can appreciate them. Princess Sophia stepped up beside him, her young voice clear and strong despite the tears that had been threatening to fall. Captain Reed is right. My great-grandmother did plant these roses for all children, and she would have been proud to see you enjoying them today. The transformation in the princess was remarkable. Standing next to someone who had chosen to protect her at the cost of his own career, she seemed to draw strength and courage from his example. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, and for the first time in the entire confrontation, she looked directly at her grandmother without flinching. "I'm sorry if my behavior disappointed you, grandmother," Sophia said with quiet dignity, "but I'm not sorry for trying to make our guests feel welcome. That's what queens are supposed to do, take care of their people, not make them feel small and unwanted." Queen Isabella stared at her granddaughter as if seeing a stranger. This was not the meek, easily cowed child she thought she had been molding. This was a young woman discovering her own voice and the courage to use it, even in the face of royal displeasure. "You have both forgotten who you are," the queen said coldly. "You have forgotten your duty, your position, and your obligations to the crown." "No," Marcus replied firmly. "We've remembered what the crown is supposed to stand for." The crowd of children, teachers, and staff had been watching this exchange with the fascination and horror typically reserved for natural disasters. They were witnessing the breakdown of royal authority in real time, seeing the carefully maintained facade of unity and respect within the royal family crumble before their eyes. Little Sarah, the 7-year-old with the limp who had connected so deeply with Princess Sophia earlier, broke free from her teacher's protective hold and walked deliberately over to where the princess and Captain Reed stood together. Without saying a word, she took Princess Sophia's hand in her own small one, a gesture of solidarity that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. One by one, the other children followed Sarah's lead, forming a protective circle around their royal guide and her defender. They might not have understood all the adult complexities of what was happening, but they understood kindness and cruelty, justice and injustice, with the clear moral vision that children possess before the world teaches them to compromise their principles. James, the 9-year-old questioner, looked up at Queen Isabella with the fearless honesty that had gotten him into trouble at school more than once. "Your Majesty, why are you being so mean to Princess Sophia? She was just trying to be nice to us." The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Queen Isabella had built her reign upon. How could she explain to a child that kindness was weakness, that distance was necessary for authority, that fear was more reliable than love? How could she justify a worldview that saw these innocent faces as potential threats to royal dignity rather than future subjects to be cherished and protected? For the first time in decades, Queen Isabella found herself at a loss for words, surrounded by a revolution she had inadvertently created, and facing the possibility that her own granddaughter might choose to stand with her protector rather than submit to royal authority. The Children's Garden Festival had become something far more significant than anyone had planned. It had become the day when Princess Sophia discovered who she wanted to be as a future queen, and when Captain Marcus Reed discovered that some things were worth sacrificing everything to protect. The confrontation was far from over, and the consequences of this moment would ripple through the kingdom for years to come. The silence that followed little James's innocent question seemed to stretch for an eternity. Queen Isabella stood frozen, her carefully constructed authority challenged not by political rivals or media critics, but by the moral clarity of children who hadn't yet learned that power sometimes justified cruelty. The weight of 300 pairs of eyes, young and old, hopeful and horrified, pressed down upon her like a physical force. It was Princess Sophia who finally broke the silence, stepping forward with a grace and composure that would have made any previous generation of royals proud. At 12 years old, she had discovered something that her grandmother had spent decades trying to suppress: the understanding that true royal authority came from service, not dominance. "I think," Sophia said clearly, her voice carrying across the garden with surprising strength, "we should continue our tour. These children came here to see the palace gardens, and that's exactly what we're going to do." She turned to face Captain Reed, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but her expression resolute. "Captain, would you like to help me show our guests the Butterfly Conservatory? I know you've always loved the story about how it was built." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion at her courage and kindness. Even in the face of her grandmother's fury and his own professional destruction, she was thinking about the children's experience and trying to salvage their special day. This was leadership in its purest form, selfless, instinctive, and utterly authentic. "It would be my honor, Your Royal Highness," he replied formally, offering her a perfect military bow that carried more respect and reverence than any gesture he had ever made to her grandmother. Queen Isabella watched this exchange with growing realization that she was losing control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond her ability to manage through intimidation. The children were looking at Princess Sophia with undisguised admiration. The teachers were smiling despite the awkwardness of the situation, and even her own palace staff seemed more engaged and energized than they had during any official function in years. "This insubordination will not stand," the Queen declared, her voice rising to carry across the entire garden. "Captain Reed, you have 5 minutes to leave these grounds, and Princess Sophia, you will return to your quarters immediately for further instruction in appropriate royal behavior." But something extraordinary happened in response to this royal command. Nothing. No one moved to obey. No one showed the automatic deference that Queen Isabella had expected her entire life. Instead, the children instinctively moved closer to Princess Sophia, forming a protective circle that seemed to declare their loyalty without words. Emma, the shy 8-year-old with the notebook, surprised everyone by speaking up in her quiet voice. "Please, Your Majesty, can't Princess Sophia finish showing us around?" She promised to tell us about the fountain where the princess in the story made her wish. The reference to the fairy tale that had become associated with the palace's central fountain was like a knife to Queen Isabella's carefully maintained composure. That story, about a young princess who wished for the wisdom to serve her people with kindness, had been one of her own favorites as a child. Before the responsibilities of the crown had hardened her heart against what she now considered dangerous sentimentality. Sarah, the little girl with the limp who had shown such courage throughout the confrontation, stepped forward and did something that no adult in the kingdom would have dared to attempt. She took Queen Isabella's hand in both of her small ones and looked up with eyes full of innocent hope. "Your Majesty," she said simply, "Princess Sophia makes us feel like we're special. Isn't that what queens are supposed to do?" The question cut through every layer of royal protocol, political calculation, and defensive anger that Queen Isabella had built around herself over 3 decades of rule. For a moment, she was transported back to her own childhood, when she had dreamed of being the kind of queen who would be remembered for her kindness rather than her power. The memory hit her like a physical blow, herself at 7 years old, standing in these same gardens with her own grandmother, listening to stories about princesses who used their positions to help others and create beauty in the world. When had she lost that vision? When had protecting the monarchy become more important than fulfilling its highest ideals? Looking down into Sarah's trusting face, Queen Isabella felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but opening. The child's words echoed with a truth that she had spent years trying to deny, that real strength came from lifting others up, not keeping them down. Captain Reed watched this internal struggle play out across the Queen's features, and recognized the moment when a lifetime of rigid thinking began to shift. His military training had taught him to identify when an enemy was considering surrender. But this was different. This was someone rediscovering their own humanity. "Perhaps," Queen Isabella said slowly, her voice softer than anyone had heard it in years, "we could all continue the tour together." The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. Her posture remained regal, her bearing still commanded respect, but something fundamental had changed in her expression. For the first time in decades, she looked less like an intimidating monarch and more like a grandmother who had temporarily lost her way. Princess Sophia stared at her grandmother in amazement, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Together?" "Yes," the Queen replied, and then did something that shocked everyone present. She smiled. Not the practiced political smile she used for cameras and state functions, but a genuine expression of warmth that transformed her entire face. "I believe I may have forgotten some of the stories about these gardens myself. Perhaps you could remind me." What followed was unlike any royal event in the history of Aldermere. Queen Isabella, Princess Sophia, and the dismissed Captain Reed led the children through the palace grounds together, sharing stories, answering questions, and creating memories that would last a lifetime. The Queen rediscovered the joy of seeing wonder through children's eyes, while Princess Sophia learned that even the most hardened hearts could remember how to be kind. Captain Reed remained at his post that day, though his official status wouldn't be resolved for several weeks. The Queen's public reversal of his dismissal would eventually become one of the most talked-about moments of her reign, but more importantly, it marked the beginning of a new approach to royal service that would define the kingdom for the next generation. The media coverage of the Children's Garden Festival focused on the unprecedented access and warmth displayed by the royal family, completely missing the deeper drama that had played out. The real story of a captain who chose conscience over career, a princess who discovered her voice, and a queen who remembered her heart, remained known only to those who had witnessed it firsthand. Years later, when Princess Sophia became Queen Sophia the Compassionate, historians would trace the beginning of her revolutionary reign to this single afternoon in the palace gardens. Captain Reed would serve as her personal advisor until his retirement, helping to transform the royal guard from a ceremonial force into a true guardian of the people's welfare. But on that day, as the sun set over the palace gardens and the children departed, with their hearts full of magic and their minds full of stories, the most important transformation was the simplest one. 3 adults had remembered that the purpose of power was to protect and serve, especially those who had no power of their own. The Children's Garden Festival had become exactly what Princess Sophia had hoped it would be, a day when the palace truly belonged to everyone, and kindness proved stronger than cruelty. In standing up for what was right, Captain Reed had not just protected a princess, he had helped save the soul of a kingdom.